Okay. So, really where we left off with our last lecture, which is last Thursday, we really were kind of working on the doors and kind of finishing up some of these other parts. Just kind of really starting to kind of break things up, thicken them, stuff like that. So remember, one of the things you could do is you can always go to your outliner, because we do want to finish up a little bit of that door inside of there. And sometimes it's not that easy to see in here and work with the other objects visible, right? So remember, you have your outliner over here, right? It's up in the right, top right corner. This is a lot like Maya's outliner. I know some of you guys are like, I've never used Maya. Well, some of you guys have, and at some point you guys will probably have to learn it, right? Blender's incredible, and quite frankly, I think it's one of the best software out there, but Modo's pretty great. In fact, Modo and Blender are my favorites easily. But Maya is widely used in the industry. At some point, you'll see it at college, right? That's what we teach at my college. So I know Maya quite well. And that's why one of the reasons we're using industry compatible, because Maya, that's kind of Maya's default setup, and it's honestly awesome. And I just get to take advantage of the coolest parts of Maya, but the coolest parts of Blender with this current Blender stuff. So remember, Outliner's here, though, and it's very much a list of all your objects in your scene. And the visibility eyeballs. In fact, this is more like Modo. If you actually go into Modo, you'll actually find basically the same kind of thing with eyeballs in the same place. So Blender 2.8 series, they really kind of stole a bunch of awesome stuff from Maya and Modo, and then have some of their own really cool stuff. And it's kind of this just perfect storm of awesomeness that Blender's become, basically. That's why I ultimately left Modo for it, is because all the stuff I loved about Modo, all the stuff I loved about Maya, and some of Blender's own really cool stuff, like, yay! So basically, remember, we could turn the eyeballs off, right? And you can even left-click drag to kind of turn them off, right? So you don't have to keep click, 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 click. You can just hold down your left mouse button and drag to turn them off. Makes it really easy to control the visibility for your objects. Obviously, you have the ability to hide and unhide specific polygons, right? In fact, I'm trying to remember where it's at. I think it's going to be specifically in Polygons and other places like that. I know the quick keys for it. There it is, yeah. Object. You'll notice that if you go to Object, you have the ability to hide, unhide, Alt-H, Control-H, Shift-H. So I know we haven't used that much, but you can actually specifically hide polygons. And they're all quick keys for them, revolving around H, Control-H, Alt-H. So kind of nice setup of like Control-Shift-Alt with your H for hide. So if you go to the Object mode, Show Hide is there as well. And that's for if you wanted to do things at the specific polygon level, right? So if I wanted to specifically hide polygons, I could do it there. But if you've already got them separate as objects, it's really easy just to use Outliner, right? So I'm going to zoom in here. I'm going to hit 3 for face mode, right? Because we might want to do more stuff on faces. We might want to do some stuff on border edges. It kind of depends on what you want, right? Just to show this, though, if I was to select some faces here, remember, we kind of had that option that we saw there a minute ago with hide and show. You'll see it in the mesh menu now, right? So you can actually, object level, it's going to be in the object menu. When you're actually in, say, face mode, if you go to the mesh menu, you'll see show hide there. And you'll see it's the same quick keys, and it's just specifically set up to be what you want. So if I was to, say, do Shift-H, right, you see how it only shows those. Alt-H will bring everything back, right? And Control-H will just hide. So you can, of course, hide, show, only what's selected. So if you go to the mesh menu, there is show hide. And you have hide selected, hide unselected, and then reveal all that's hidden. So kind of neat, right? You do have the ability to specifically hide, unhide specific faces, not just whole objects. And you'll find that those, all of those are useful, right? The ability to turn the visibility off for on and off for objects, but as well as just hiding, unhiding faces, right? So just remember that. Mesh menu, show hide. If you're in object mode, it'll be in the object menu, show hide. In this case, though, I really did want to do some more stuff with border edges. So I'm going to hit 2 for edge mode, right? Remember, 3 is for face mode, and you could usually only hide faces, right? So we're going to hit 2 for edge mode. So that's going to give us our ability to extrude and bridge border edges. Now, in this case, we kind of have this out here a little bit, right? And, of course, I can get one for vertex if I wanted to, just to tweak a vertex. Remember, I have my tweak tool on my default. I've got some quick key set up for those, but you can also just toggle through, right? Q, just to toggle through them. So I'm going to go 2 for edge mode again. And what I want to do is I want to start to kind of, I want to leave a bit of a lip here for, like, you know, your door handle and all those things right there. And obviously we don't have to have every little detail done for it. As we subdivide later on, we can easily have a little more geometry to build more details. Some of those things could just be built on top and don't have to actually be built into it. We're not going to try to build every little detail for this car, guys. That's a little bit insane for people that are building their first cars. So we're focusing more on the kind of major primary forms and shapes and getting you guys some good practice with this extrude bridge border edge method without necessarily expecting you to build every little small part. And if you don't really see that much inside the car, all you need is the general car forms in there, not every little detail. So we're going to grab these border edges here, right? Remember, Shift adds to selections, of course. And if you're in tweak mode, it also subtracts, right? So certain modes, particularly the tweak tool mode, Shift will add and subtract. If you're kind of doing stuff with edge loops or linked stuff, Control double left click will do that stuff, right? So you can kind of use Control sometimes. So it depends on what tool you're in, if Shift or Control is going to add or subtract selections. But generally, in particular for the tweak tool, Shift will both add and subtract, right? You'll see Control doesn't do it. So I'm going to select those. I'm going to hit Control E for extrude, right? Remember, extrude's right there, but Control E is the quick key. And we're going to do middle mouse button because that's just our view extrude. And I'll hit R for scale, right? Middle mouse button, do uniform scale. W for move, right? Remember, they're all right here. Move, rotate, scale, right? But they have quick keys, W, E, R. Just like Maya's or Moto's or 3D Studio Max's. QWERTY for move, rotate, and scale is actually pretty universal, right? Good Blender gives you the industry-compatible option to turn that on. So the nice thing is, even though you're learning Blender, many of these things are going to actually translate over to something like Moto or Maya or 3D Studio Max. 3D Studio Max does not use Maya navigation, and Moto, like Blender, you have to kind of turn it on, but it is there. But yeah, so just kind of remember that a lot of things you're learning are actually pretty universal. Double left click is actually usually select edge loop in most software, right? So some of these quick keys you're learning are actually pretty universal in a lot of software. So yeah, we're learning it in Blender, but also you're kind of pretty well set up for later on too, right? Making it easy to transition in different software. That doesn't mean you'd be learning better software. You just might be learning different software that your school uses or whatever, right? And you might sit there and use it and go, hey, I still think Blender's better. And I'm like, I do too, but you know, Blender's getting reasonably popular, and it's always kind of had some popularity, but there's other software out there, right? So in this case, you know, I've kind of selected these edge loops, right? I've been going off on slight tangents today's video, but just trying to remind you about the universal aspect of everything you're learning here translates to different software, right? Everything you're doing in Blender can be done in other in software. Most of the things. Some of the cool things you can do with the curves, the splines, particularly if you're like hoses and pipes in Blender, that's kind of pretty unique to Blender, honestly. But most of the stuff goes to different software. You can extrude and bridge border edges in other software, extrude and bridge borders or add loops. So you just happen to be learning a lot of good modeling techniques that we're just happening to learn in Blender. So in this case, remember, we're just selecting kind of these two edges to these two edges, because when you're bridging, you always want it to be same to same. Technically, Blender can bridge different number to different number, but it will create all triangles. So for me, I just generally, anyways, no matter what software I'm using, I always try to do same number to same number. So two edges to two edges. Remember, right-click, of course, brings up your edge context menu. Right-click brings up whatever context menu you're in. So if you're in object mode, it'll bring up object context menu, right? If you're in face mode, it'll bring up face context menu. And there is, of course, bridge edge loops. Now, in this case, I've already set up a quick key for it because bridge is quite a useful tool I use all the time, so I have a quick key set up for these things. But by default, it doesn't have one. So bridge edge loops, and that, remember, makes new geometry between there. Now, I think this could be a little sharper through here. So I'm just going to do Alt-C for loop cut, right? Remember, Alt-C for loop cut. I'm just going to loop cut a little edge loop in there. And you see how it kind of sharpens that shape up? That's one of the things we've been seeing a little bit more, is that when you put in edge loops, turn my 2 tool on there, it'll sharpen an area up, right? So if I hit W for move and I move this in more, you see that area becomes more creased, that area becomes more creased. Remember, you really see the sharpening of the shape in a subdivision surface modifier at corners, right, where there's rounded areas, right? If it's a bunch of flat planar, coplanar polygons, you won't see it that much. You'll only see it at the borders or the corners where a shape has curvature and roundness. But it's because it's basically taking that rounding that the subdivisional modifier does, and you're making it smaller by making it closer. And so it keeps that rounding going, but the rounded shape itself is smaller, and so it looks more like a bevel, right, instead of being too soft. Now in this case, I want to just double click, right, double left click to select a border edge loop. Remember, double left click selects edge loops or border edge loops because there's a hole right here. And remember, if you right click, you will see that there is a new face from edges, right? And that will actually fill that face in. I can do the same thing here, double left click there, right click, new face from edges, and that's your fill hole. But now you see there's kind of a nice little kind of creased shape and form here for this kind of area, for the kind of door frame. If you wanted to, you could get 3 for face mode, grab those 2 faces and just move them in a little bit more, move them down a little bit more. And you see how you kind of have that area where maybe your handle would go, your locked door, your electronic window stuff. So, we can easily extrude and bridge border edges and new face from edges, right? New face from edges in Blender is actually fill, right? There technically is a fill tool, but you'll actually notice it fills with triangles. Grid fill will actually try to kind of fill it with quads in a grid shape. But believe it or not, it's actually the new face from edges that is actually going to do the normal fill tool, where it just fills it with just one giant n-gon. But there are some other fill tools that do something similar, but they are a little bit different. And we kind of want to do something similar here, except in this case, I feel like we're going to kind of just go to 2 for edge mode. I'm going to grab this edge and this edge because I want that kind of curvature there. And of course, we can hold down Shift to add, to grab those edges. And honestly, even these, right? Because you'll notice how there's just a single edge not selected here and just a single edge not selected there. That's lovely. Some tool work outside. But you'll see, remember, 3 edges to 3 edges, and there's kind of these 2 edges not selected. So when I right-click to do bridge edge loops, it bridges them together, merges those edges there, and now we've got that kind of nice little bit of kind of curvature form for the door, right? If I want, I could bring this one in a little bit more to get a little more sharp crease. If we really wanted to, we could always try to put an extra edge loop through there. I think we'll leave it. I just want it to be nice and soft. But once again, you see how this kind of edge loop flow follows the contour of that rounded shape we want to, right? So that's the thing, is you want these shapes to follow the contours. And of course, we need to start to kind of fill in the back here. So in this case, I'm just going to, I really feel like I'm just going to bridge 2 edges. These 2 to these 2. Right-click, bridge edge loops. And then, of course, I could double-click on the hole there, and an edge for the hole there. Right-click, new face from edges. And then we'll just double left-click up here, new face from edges. And you see we just kind of filled those in. And of course, if I want to, I could tweak the shape a little bit more here. There we go. And this could kind of be the back of the door, right? And you'll notice I've got a triangle here. I'm going to hit 1 for vertex. And in this case, you notice how that triangle kind of works for like a nice kind of termination of that point? So remember, even though you want to stay primarily with quads, an occasional triangle, if it's working for your shape, if it's not causing any shape issues, tends to be fine, tends to be acceptable, right? In this case, I don't feel like the triangle is doing too much to screw up our shape there. So sometimes you will find that you might have a triangle to kind of terminate an area. It really depends on if that 5-star it creates, right? Remember, there are stars in 3D, and those are vertices with certain amount of edges. In this case, this is a 5-star because it's got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 edges. you're naturally going to have some 5 stars on models, right? It all depends on the bigger the star, though. It's like an N-gon. So if you get like a 7 or an 8 star, you'll start to see that the shape pinches too much in that area. It's harder to control the shape the way you want to. So the bigger the star, it's kind of like an N-gon. The more likely it's going to cause problems, be harder to work with to get the correct shape. If it has to animate, it'll behave unpredictably when it animates. So 5 stars are pretty acceptable. You're going to have naturally some 5 stars on a model, but you do want to be careful with them, right? If it's creating a too weird a shape, then that's where you might want to try to add maybe an extra edge loop or build a quad in there. Sometimes it's not possible, and sometimes the actual triangle and the 5 star work well with the shape, right? In this case, you can kind of see it's really not causing too significant an issue for us. But remember, you do want to be careful, right, with your stars. The bigger they get, the more likely they'll cause problems. We really do prefer to work primarily with quads, but the occasional triangle, if it terminates a shape the way you want it to, and the 5 stars not pinching too much or pulling in weird ways, tends to be fine. N-gons on walls of buildings where you're doing stuff like booleans, because those are all planar and coplanar polygons, tends to not cause too many problems. So even though we want a strong quad bias, right, for our modeling, the occasional N-gon and triangle, if used appropriately, is not going to be an issue. Your life will be easier generally, though, if you try to work primarily in all or mostly quads, right? And if you try to avoid too many large stars, right? So yeah, just kind of some words of wisdom, right? You don't have to be nuts about that stuff, but having it as kind of a general basis for how you model, definitely very useful, right? Always try to keep your stars smaller if you can, and at a minimum on a model. Sometimes you see they're very necessary and they actually work to tie into your shapes. 5 stars tend to be reasonably acceptable. You build a character creature, you're going to have some 5 stars on it. It's the natural process of connecting non-linear shapes together, you know, curves and edge loops that bend in weird ways or pull weird shapes, or even just extruding to create arms, legs, fingers, toes, create some natural stars there that are 5 stars. So I figured kind of a little bit of talk about that would be good. At this point, let me go back to 4 for object mode. And we can start to bring on some of these other objects, like say maybe our car body here. Because what we want to do is we want to maybe start to maybe break up some of these other parts. Or, you know, we could like bring the trunk back on, right, turn the eyeball for the car trunk. In this case, we can kind of see how we've got this gap here, right, where it's not looking properly thickened. So remember, you can go click your body, hit 2 for edge mode, double left click, right? Double left click selects edge loops on this border edge loop there. And we could easily just hit Control E for extrusion, middle mouse button to kind of bring in that little bit right there to kind of create the illusion of thickness, right? You really don't have to thicken your whole car body, but you might want to create the illusion of thickness in areas like this, right? And just a little bit of an extrude border edge that you can bring in a bit just to kind of give you that little lip is very useful. In this case, we can see that it's a little bit too rounded here to match the door or the trunk. If I add an edge loop through here, it could start to lose some of the rounded shape there. So I feel like here it's going to be much better. So I'm going to do Alt-C for loop cut, all right? And I can just loop cut, drag an edge loop in there. And then I'm going to put one down here as well. So I just kind of added some loop cuts here and here. And obviously we could shape those, right? I could double left click, hit W for move to kind of round it off a little bit. Maybe bring that back up a little bit there. Same thing here, double left click. You know, we can kind of bring that back out, keep that shape more rounded. And of course, we can go in here and we can easily just, you know, maybe go to 3 for face mode and tweak that face in a little bit. Tweak that face in a little bit. And you see how we can kind of slowly start to bring these back in to match shape-wise. I go back to 2 for edges to kind of bring that edge back in there. And you see how we start to get that shape to match up a lot better now, right? So there we go. And now we can see that that trunk area is just looking more like a proper trunk area. We could, of course, sharpen up some more edge loops as we go, and we will as we come back. But I figured that'd be kind of a good way to remind you guys, hey, you don't have to actually have the car body fully thickened, but areas where you should have the illusion of some thickness, you should have it. We're not going to open the trunk up. If you're going to open the trunk up in an animation, then you have to build the full trunk inside of there, right? But we're not doing that for this. So we're not trying to build we're not going to build a motor for this car. You guys know if you play a racing game and the hood flies off and there's a motor in there, that motor has to be built for that car, right? But if your cars don't have that level of destructibility, or they're just background cars, right? Like say in the Division, right? Division games, or even, the Last of Us games. If you don't see inside the trunk of the car, or you don't see inside the engine housing, nobody modeled that, right? That doesn't get modeled. If you don't see it, you don't model it. In this case, we're not going to see inside the trunk. We're not going to see the motor, so we're not modeling those things. It's really about the car body and, using that extrude and bridge border edge technique effectively to build a neat car body, right? So, of course, I can turn some of these eyeballs back on for some of this other stuff, and we can start to see slowly, we're getting closer and closer to having this car finished. Eventually, we'll do some extrude border edge on this, but that will save that for Thursday's lecture, right? So just kind of getting a little bit more of that reinforcement of stuff. We'll start to eventually build our windows and things like that. But just kind of taking it further. All right, so that'd be a great place to stop. It's a little bit past 9:30, so I always like to only have about a 20-minute, maybe slightly more than 20-minute video for you guys. All right, so let me stop recording.